Hey guys, what's cracking? Godsman here, coming at you with a updated Drajeweled deck profile for post set 7. It's finally here. So, for those of you who keep up my community posts, you probably realized that a while ago I made a poll regarding which deck profile to do next. And Drajeweled won that poll by a fair degree, beating out even Youthbrick, which really surprised me, not gonna lie. But hey, I was happy to do this profile. So happy, in fact, that it took me a lot longer than I thought it would, just on the basis of trying to work out some of the kinks and flex spots of this deck to really get it down to a science. While there's a lot of core elements to the deck, there's also a fair bit of flex that makes it kind of hard to build it to your appeal, because Dark Stasis has a lot of good generic staples, and they're all pretty relative in power, I feel. So, having said that, I'm going to go over a few alternative options near the end of this profile that you can consider to try and customize this list to your perfection, especially given that Brainwash Spoiler, which I'm not including in this particular deck list, but would, in my opinion, be the optimal part of this deck list, is really expensive. But we'll go over more on things you can do to replace him and other elements of this deck. But with that said, I think that's going to do it for the preface. Let's go ahead and get started with the profile. Okay, so just like with any other standard profile, we're going to begin in the same place as always, which is, what is our right line? So, of course, start with grade 0, Jewelias Dracokid, generic skill. If you rode and if you went second, you get to draw a card. Cool. Grade 1, this is Jewel Core Dragon. So, Jewel Core Dragon states that when it's rode upon by Jewelneel, the grade 2 of the right line, you call it Drajeweled. And then when it attacks or boosts, it gets 5k, but then at the end of that battle, it sucks in the soul. This is mandatory. So whatever you do, if you swing or boost with it, it's going to be a 13k, but then it's going back into soul. But you want that to happen, because the strategy with Drajeweled is to accumulate 4 different grades in the soul to then soul blast them out for Drajeweled skill. So you're removing a grade 1 temporarily from the soul, but then you get a nice extra attack without having to invest a card in hand. So that's really cool. But having said that, I will say that one of the really nice things about this card is that it happened to be generically viable and stuff like Bruce, but it finds its home here in Drajeweled. So yeah, it's just a grade 1 the right line, and that's what you use it for. Grade 2 is Jewelneel. So Jewelneel states that on Van or Rear, when this unit's attack hits a Vanguard, you soul charge 1. And when it's rode upon by Drajeweled, you soul charge 1 again. And if your soul has 3 or more cards with different grades, you draw a card. This is a phenomenal grade 2 ride. Here's the thing. Usually, they're going to give you the soul charge on hit. I would say about 8, maybe 9 times out of 10, get that soul charge. I don't get denied out of it that often, especially if you give it a strong booster with Jewel Core, although my general strategy is just to swing with it as a front row rear guard and just leave it at that. But you can use this as a booster to really ensure that soul charge. But even if you don't get that soul charge, you're going to be guaranteed the other soul charge, and the draw is also guaranteed as long as you put Jewel Core back in. Because when you ride over, then you're going to have this in soul, Jewel Core in soul, and Jewelneel himself in soul. So there you go, 3 different grades, bada bing, bada boom. So yeah, Jewelneel is just easy +1, gets you soul, and does everything that a Dark States card should be doing, in all honesty. So yeah, nothing I can do to complain about him. Alright, moving on to the grade 3, the head honcho of the deck. We've got Demonic Jewel Dragon Drajeweled. So, just to note, I did use some top deck heroes proxies, and the reason being that there's a lot of set 7 cards here that aren't released in English, but I wanted to get to this profile, and so I thought, hey, you know, let's give a shout out to Top Deck Heroes. They make amazing proxies. They've given it out to everyone. You can go on to any of their videos, and they have the link right there to the drive where they have all these. So yeah, go maybe give them a sub, check out some of their videos, and check out these proxies if you want to make some yourself, because they're really nice. And I don't tend to use them very often, but I'm making an exception with this profile because there's just so many set 7 cards that you're going to see basically more than half the deck be Japanese otherwise, and I thought, F it, let's just go the extra mile for Drajeweled. So speaking of Drajeweled, what does he do? Well, he's essentially dust for you G players, and If you didn't have PTSD at that statement and run for cover, congratulations. You probably didn't have to endure the hardship of pre-errata dust. But let's talk about Drajeweled here, and what do I mean by dust? So, his main skill is his second skill, which is Auto Unvan. When he attacks a Vanguard, you Soul Blast 4 cards with different grades. Choose one of your opponent's Vanguards until end of turn, increase or decrease its power to 1, and if your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, this unit gets a crit +1. Wooch! So, it has another skill that we'll go into later, but I want to explain this skill, because this is by far the main skill of Drajeweled. This is the real moneymaker skill right here, is this ability to reduce the opponent's power to 1. So, let's just put it into perspective. Because you're reducing their power to 1, basically, it's like as if they need to shield a crap ton more all the time. Reducing them, say, from 13 to 1 means that everything that they have to guard with is going to be maybe 10k, 15k more than usual, and that's on top of the fact that the guy gets crit pressure. So on its own, that's pretty good, but then when you add in a couple other cards that get retires or even multi-attack with big power lines, and suddenly your opponent is in a little bit of a tight bind where they either have to take a lot of damage or if they're at death's door, they need to PG or GG it, and that's really scary. Now, some things to note about this power thing. It does actually stop the overtrigger. Now, when I mean stop, I mean that if the overtrigger triggers and Drajeweled hasn't used its skill yet, you can actually get rid of all that power, and that goes for any defensive trigger. So that's really neat. They have to take prior to Drajeweld swing. Now, the only reason why you wouldn't swing with Drajeweld first is that if you have another card we'll go into later that multi-attacks, it restands itself after the Vanguard does its thing, so you swing with it first, then swing with the Vanguard. But yeah, that's what it can do. However, if they get a defensive after they're put to 1 with Drajeweld, that defense remains. So one defensive will put them at 10,001, 2 is 20,001, so on and so forth. So do keep that in mind. However, another thing to note is, what about Vanguards that get continuous power buffs above? So MLB would be the primary example of this. Essentially how it goes is, and I've checked this is real info. So how it goes is, it basically checks their power at the time and then decreases their value based on that. Let's take DMLB. DMLB is 15,000 all times. That means that he's withstanding a negative 14,999. So if for whatever reason he lost either the Blaster Blade or the Blaster Darkened Soul and thus lost to 2,000 power, his power would then become negative 1,999. So no, if they have continuous buffs that give him power, it doesn't override this. It just means that they're going to be at 1, and if for whatever reason those continuous buffs are not there while this effect is in effect, then they're going to go into a negative number value, and that is dummy bad because that negative number applies to your shields. So bada bing, bada boom, your shields are even more in the crapper. So do know how that goes. Now he does have a second skill, which is Act on Van once per turn, Counterblast 1, and Soul Charge 2. If the cards Soul Charge have different grades, you may draw a card. Surprisingly, this can whiff sometimes where you do Soul Charge 2 the same grade, but it is still a Soul Charge 2 at bare minimum, but it is for a CB, so you probably do want to get the draw as much as possible because that is the standard here, where 1 CB equals 1 plus that's the norm. So if you don't get that, it does kind of suck, but the Soul Charge does build up to the Soul Blast 4 requirement, although it is random chance. But the Soul Charge 2 also can power up your Brainwash Swirlers, assuming you do have the moolah to run that one. Anyway, so that's going to do it for explaining the boss unit. Let's talk about some other stuff in this deck. Now, of course, right away, let me just say, 3 Persona, that's it. It's like with most other decks, you do just run 3 Persona and leave it at that. This deck doesn't have a grade 4. Now then, another grade 3 run is 4 copies of Rystal Galer. So, Rystal Galer is the right-hand man to Senior Drajeweled. He's a great grade 3 to have here. His effect is just one effect. Auto on rear. When he attacks a Van, if you Soul Blast more at the same time for the cost of your Vanguard's ability this turn, essentially saying if you activated Drajeweld's main ability this turn, then you can put a card from hand to soul to draw, and then retire one of your opponent's rears. So, that's really nice. You're rebuilding up your soul with a selective unit in hand. So remember, you need to have a 0, a 1, a 2, and a 3. So if you're missing a grade in there, this can help you put one from hand and then draw it back for you. But then you also just get to have a selective retire of any of your opponent's units. That's very nice in this format. You can peck out all sorts of pieces there, and on top of that, Rystal Galer's status as a grade 3 is in and of itself important because that's one of the grades we need. So if we don't have a healthy amount of different grades in our deck, our ability to maintain that Soul Blast 4 restriction is going to become that much harder. So it is good to run a fair bit of grade 3s here because that is for one of the lesser grades. Grade 1 and grade 0 are going to be a lot bigger than the 2s and the 3s. So that's why I like to run them before. You can, of course, move out a copy or two if you have other grade 3s you like, or just other stuff in general. He's not that important, but I just think the combination of Soul Setup, Filter, and Retire is really nice and multifunctional. Okay. Next up on the docket is 2 copies of Miloslava. So Miloslava is more of just my personal pick for this deck. What it does is when it's placed on rear from hand during your main phase, note all those different stipulations right there, you counterblast 1, choose a card from your soul with grade less than or equal to your Vanguard, put it into hand if it has the same name as your Vanguard, and call it to rear if it does not. But if you did put it in hand, aka add that persona right target, it gets 5k on a turn. So it's literally just like what I said. You just have a Drajeweled out here, lol, that's Jewelneel. You have a Jewel out here, and then you manage to have 1 in soul. Maybe you persona road, maybe you soul charged it. You slap her down, add it back, and there you go. You're ready to get revving up again. Now do note that don't do this and get something from the soul that was the only grade of its kind in the soul. If you add back persona target but now you don't have a grade 3 in there, that kind of sucks. Don't do that, please. Likewise, if maybe you wanted to call a grade 2 or a grade 1 that's a nice rear guard, but you didn't have anything else in there, don't do that. But it is still just really nice multifunctional. It's a +1 either way with this counterblast. It gets a little bit of power. And just the fact that it adds persona is really nice because the persona ride really helps make this deck feel that much more threatening. Because it does have some ways of getting increased stats, but not that many ways, not inherently. So yeah, the persona ride is a really nice touch to it. So we want to get those personas. Moving on to grade 2. So this deck has 2 MVPs, and the first of those 2 MVPs is going to be Rockargour. So I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Please don't butcher me in the comments over it. It has 2 skills. Auto on rear, once per turn. When it attacks a grade 3 or greater Vanguard, if your soul has 4 or more cards with different grades, it gets 10k power. Gee willikers, I wonder why it has that restriction. Auto on rear, when you soul blast 4 or more cards at the same time for the cost of your Vanguard's ability, if your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, use CB1 and stand it. So yeah, this guy is the absolute shiznit. It's a rear guard multi-attack for you. If you have 2 of them, then you can CB2 and get you extra attacks, making Drajeweled technically a 5-attack deck. And it swings for 20 on its own, 30 on Persona Ride. It's got everything you need to be just that premier beater and pressure unit. Now, a couple stipulations about Rockargour. First off, the first skill to get 10k, it procs only once a turn, but it's whenever it swings, and it is until end of turn, that 10k bonus. So just swing at the first, it gets 10k until end of turn, then restand and go again. Now, you don't get the 10k again, but because it lasts until the end of turn, you effectively got 2 uses of that 10k power up. That's really nice. Second thing to note though is that both of this guy's skills are locked into the opponent being grade 3 or greater. That's the thing. If your opponent's on a grade 2 Vanguard and you're swinging at that thing, this thing is an effing vanilla. Now, I would really suggest that you wait until the opponent's grade 3 to call this guy down. The reason being that yes, you can still call as a grade 2, it can intercept, it can rush a little early, but here's the problem with that. People who have experience against Drajeweled know that this card is just that freaking important, and they will try to get rid of it as soon as they can within reason. So if you're not going to get like much use out of it, you can't use its skill, and you also can't defend it adequately if they're going full force on it, then you basically call down one of your greatest pieces only to die before you could actually get any purpose from it. And that freaking sucks. So don't call them out until you're ready to use them to the fullest. But yeah, Rockargour at 4 is just mandatory. Next up, we have 4 copies of Ultrasound Shrie. So this, people go back and forth on this one. I like this card a fair bit, but you can take it or leave it. It just has one skill, which is that when it's placed on rear from hand, you CB, look at 3 cards from top of deck, you put one of them into the soul, and then if you have 4 more different grades in your soul, you draw a card. So yeah, it's about as drawable as it gets, you know? Sets up selectively into soul and gets you a draw for CB. That's all you really need to know about this unit. It is another grade 2, and we do want to run a fair bit of grade 2s here just so that you can see grade 2s in your soul. There are ways to juggle cards that you've soul blasted out back into your soul, which is nice. So I'm running not a lot of grade 2s. As a matter of fact, I'm only running 8. But assuming you can juggle, then you can just keep the Jewelneel and the ride line in soul, then that'll be that. So yeah, I just find this to be a +1 in setup. It's only thing you need to know about it. There's other cards that do stuff like this, but I think this one was one of the best one of the herd. Okay, so moving on to grade 1s. I'll just get this out of the way. We're running 3 PG and 1 Elementaria. Not a lot to say here, right? This is more or less the standard thing that you would expect from anyone. Just having the 1 Elementaria for those specific times where you're going up against Guard Restrict or Grade 4 decks. Really nice. And then 3 other PG because they're PGs. What do you want to do? Not die here? So, boom. Okay, so I mentioned 2 MVPs. Here's the second MVP of the deck. It is Falcate Performer. Falcate has 1 skill and it only needs 1 skill. Auto on rare. When this unit boosts, choose up to 1 card from your drop, and if you do not have the same grade as that card in your soul, put it into your soul. There you go. It's a free way to rebuild that 4 of straight in your soul, and it's when it boosts, so you could literally, if you so chose, you could get Mr. Maholder here, and when you swing, if you have a missing card, let's put it like this, right? So, if you swing, let's say your soul is built up properly. You have 1 of each grade in your soul. You can soul blast them out to do the effect, and then Falcate can trigger next and put something back into your soul, a missing grade that you don't have. Alternatively, if you are already missing a grade, you put it in the soul and then trigger his skill in that attack and soul blast 4. It's very versatile that way. And if you soul blast a bunch and you have multiple cards that are missing, if you have more Falcates, boom, boost with them, and they proc 2 to build back the soul. It's just your premier way of making sure that your soul stays healthy and relevant. And I love Falcate for that one reason alone. And he is just a staple 4-up. I love to see him. As a matter of fact, the next card we're going to go into is essentially a knockoff version of him because I just really need to see this kind of effect now. Alright, so next up, we've got 2 copies of, or Fergios, or Fergus, however you want to pronounce it. This guy just says, when placed on rear, if you have a Drajeweled, you Soul Blast 1 to choose a card from your drop, put it into your soul, and it gets 2k. So yeah, it's basically a Falcate, but it doesn't need to boost to do this. And it is a 10k booster or attacker for that turn, so those are neat things, but it's only one use of this, because it's only one place. So that's it. Whereas Falcate is every turn, you just get 1 instance of it, and you go from there. So yeah, he's not as good as Falcate, that's why I'm running him at 2, but I just really needed to see that ability to rebuild your soul selectively. So this one was another one in the herd that felt relatively relevant, so we just went for him. Okay, now here comes the contentious bit. We have 3 flex slots. So you see Power Gem here, and you could go for Power Gem, but I would say most likely go for Brainwash if you can afford it. However, if you can't afford it, we're going to go into other stuff that you could run alternatively to make this feel okay. So, for one thing, you could opt to run Multivaras. So, Multivaras state that when this unit is placed on rear, you counterblast 1, choose a card from your drop, put it in your soul. Then if you have 4 or more cards of different grades, it gets 10k. So it's another way to put in a card into the soul. For reference, Brainwash soul charges 1 and gets 5k. So they're kind of similar, except Brainwash is free, but it's 1 instance of it. Multibara is also 1 instance when it's placed, but it gets more power, and it is a selective soul build. So I'm just going to say straight up, there's a lot of CV in this deck, so I personally didn't opt for that. And Power Gem's much the same way. You can get a +1 and 1 soul. You know, the +1 is the thing that has over Brainwash, but it doesn't have power gain and it does CV. So that's another issue. Another one to consider is Gungan Ram. Gungan Ram, just like Brainwash, has a soul charge 1 when placed for free. But Gungan Ram doesn't get power. Instead, you can Soul Blast 3 to draw a card. So if you have a lot of excess grades, maybe like a bunch of grade 1s here or something, right? And you'll need all those of that excess grade, then you can Soul Blast 3 in order to get that extra plus. It's a neat option. I would say that if you're not running Brainwash, that might actually end up being your next best bet because it's the most similar to it. So yeah, I would say go ahead and go for that if you had to do something that wasn't Brainwash. But Brainwash is my #1 pick. Going around being second, and I guess Power Gem would be third there. Okay, so now we're moving on to triggers. This won't take very long. So I'm actually running Rainbow. We've got 4 copies of Crit. We've got 4 copies of Draw. We've got 3 copies of Front, 4 copies of Regular Heal, and 1 copy of Drajeweled. So yeah, not really a lot to explain here except why the hell am I running Rainbow? The reason being that Drajeweled just could use a bit of everything. Of course the crits are obvious, right? It builds up your soul even, so if you just for some desperate reason need a grade 0, you can get a grade 0 on demand that way, and it is a crit, so it's nice to at least run some. I opted for 4 draws because this deck is fairly piece reliant to try and maintain that soul that you've got, and also to get into those Rockargours and Rystal Galers and just good attackers. So yeah, that's also pretty freaking important. But then when you think about it, fronts are also really nice, right? Not just because of the +5k shield to make it a 20k shield, that's really impactful. But when you're talking about attack patterns, generally speaking, even if you have the Rockargour there to make it so that you have more than 3 attacks, when you attack with Drajeweled, you're generally going to have both of these rear guards up and at them. Whether they were restood or just always standing there for that turn, they're up and at them, ready to swing. So this is prime time to use that front trigger just to be able to blanket, get 10k, and it's a great way to add on the pressure to a Vanguard that's already at 1 power. So wah wah wah, right? They just had a bad situation that got worse. So that's why I like the free front, but also really, I like the shield a lot, guys. I like it more than having the extra crits for that 15. I really want 20k shield, so I like that. You may be like, well, why not just get rid of draws then? I already stated it. You also want to see your pieces, like, badly. And then, of course, the 4 heal is, it's really just because I don't personally care for the effect heals. They're somewhat matchup dependent, and I am kind of a stickler for shield. So with these 15s, I just want to keep it at 15 and leave it at that. If I want more shield, I'll just get it from other sources like the front. I know they're 25, but they're so freaking situational, especially that you don't even know that if that extra shield for that situation when it pops up is going to be relevant. So although they are viable, if you want to run them, go ahead and put them in there. This deck does not care what heals you run, really. It's just personal preference. So if you want to run them, go ahead. I'm just saying that I don't like it, so for the purposes of this profile, we're going to go with 4 regular heals and just keep it at that. And of course, Darkseid's Overtrigger just does not need explanation. Okay, that's going to do it for the deck list. So what do I think about overall? Drajeweled is an interesting case. I think that on one end, it's got basically everything it needs to be a gangbuster deck, right? It's got the offense, it's got the multi-attack, it's got the consistency and the card advantage. However, Drajeweled does suffer from a couple keynote things. For one thing, the multi-attack is entirely reliant on a rear guard that cannot be searched and is the only one of its kind. So if you don't see one of your 4 copies of this guy, you're just a 3 attack deck, straight up. And that you can really feel the impact of that if your opponent's just holding on to a couple BGs and just get by your turns willy-nilly. This deck doesn't really like to grind. You can grind with it and get a lot of card advantage and hold on there for a little while, but preferably you want to end it a little bit more quickly because between the soul charges and the draws and having to maintain the grades, you may not always be able to keep yourself up forever. So if you have to go on a grind state, okay, cool, you can do it, but try to kill them quicker if you can. And so yeah, Rockargour would really help with that if he was there. So we're really relying on that dude. The other problem is CB. We counterblast like a mother effer without much ways for countercharge. You could always say Selfish Engraver, but getting 10 in soul is pretty hard for this deck. You can do it, but you need to just have the setup for it, and it's ultimately not that worth it to get that setup, especially since that when you're swinging a third, you're already still blasting for Drajeweled usually because you want to swing with him before anything else. So yeah, I don't know if you're gonna get that much soul in there. So you don't really have a countercharge, and because we don't, all of our CBs are feeling like very, very precious resources. This one can CB 1 every turn. This one CB's 1 per copy. Yeah. This one CB 1 when it's placed. This one CB 1s when it's placed. Frickin' what else CBs? What else? Yes. You can also CB for the effect of Power Gem if you went for it. Or Matavara if you went for that. Right? So that's why, well, for one thing, that's why I prefer Brainwash over this, because Brainwash doesn't CB and neither does Gungaram. But on top of that, it just goes to show that your CB is very, very limited. So chill out with it, dude. Really debate what is going to be most important when you CB for a turn. If you got plenty of soul, you probably don't need this. If you have the correct things in soul, you probably don't need this. If you've already got a persona ride, you probably don't need this, unless you're desperate for pieces. This, well, you probably CB for it most of the time. If you just really need to push, just CB and go for it. Like, I would say this is your highest priority CB in the deck, and then you just go down from there based on the situation, what you need to push forward in the game. But yeah, it's a very limited resource, so be very careful when using up that counterblast, dude, because it goes like that. Like that. I've seen this deck, in fact, actually be able to CB 5 in one turn if it wanted to. It's that crazy. So yeah, be careful with it. But that's going to do it for the deck profile overall. If you guys want to see more of a breakdown of it, maybe another fight night with it, I'm going to start getting into remote fights, so it'd probably be cool to have a remote fight with this Drajeweled deck. I'm getting more into proxy deck profiles. I actually did a poll recently asking about what kind of profiles you guys like to see, and it seems the physical proxy version is the most popular by a far margin. So I'm going to try and keep on doing this and see where that goes from there. And one of the benefits is now I can remote fight with these, so I don't even have to purchase a bunch of decks to be able to get you guys all those remote fights out there. So that's another nod to Top Deck Heroes, because they did it first, and I'm not gonna lie, they're going to be doing it better than me, but hey, I'm still going to give it a crack at it, right? So yeah, I think Drajeweled is just a really, really fun deck to play. Even if it's not like some competitive top tier thing, although I do believe it's rogue, it is still incredibly satisfying to play, get all the effects, get them to pay off, just make your opponent this itsy bitsy little Vanguard and smack down hard on them. And there's also really satisfying about being able to maintain the four of soul 0, 1, 2, and 3 and just always have that ready. That's a really cool touch. So yeah, that's what I'm going to leave it off for Drajeweled here. If you guys have any questions regarding the deck list, ooh, we got a little shaky there. If you guys have any questions regarding the deck list, then do let me know down in the comment section below. I'm also free to open to criticism, suggestions, anything you particularly liked about this. Maybe there's other profiles I want to hear. I'm open to all that in the comment section below. So yeah, just go ahead and let me know. And if you did like this kind of content, I've got a lot more of it down in my channel. We do all sorts of Vanguard related things. We've got profiles, fight videos, discussions, top 10s, tier lists, you name it, we got it. So go ahead and check that out, and maybe leave a subscribe while you're at it, and turn on that notification bell for the next time that I upload. And with that, take care, and God bless.